Hey everyone. So this is not the video that I wanted to make, and it's going to be a bit different from what I normally do. There probably isn't going to be much editing, and there may or may not be music. I don't know. If there is, leave a comment, and if there isn't, leave a comment. You probably have heard that Donald Trump has won the election, unless you are living in a parallel universe or in a serial killer's basement. But I want to talk about Donald Trump getting elected for a second term, and what we can do about it. On the lead up to the election day, I was thinking I have to try and keep in mind that Trump may win. But to be honest, I don't think I managed to keep my expectations in check. I woke up the next day, saw the news in the morning, and I felt completely shattered. I had no idea how to react. I just had this sense of dread build as all the things that I'd been researching for a month in preparation for this election suddenly weren't threats anymore. They felt like a promise, and that was a really worrying thing to dwell on. And now we're here in this kind of post-election world, I suppose, where we're trying to navigate what that looks like. In this video, I want to talk about that a bit. I want to look at what this new world order is going to look like and hopefully try and provide some semblance of hope for the people out there who feel hopeless right now. But I also can't sugarcoat what this is. Everything I spoke about in the video I did about the election, there is a good possibility that that may come true now. And that is not a comforting thought. If you're, anyone who has human empathy or cares for people, may not be the best thing in the world. Just throwing that out there. But there's a number of key points I want to look at and maybe things that we need to take away from this election. I think the first point to make is that Harris did really well. I know that's a weird thing to say on the back of her losing an election, but genuinely, she had very little time to prepare for this role, and she did a fantastic job.
Absolutely fantastic.
What's happening at the moment isn't on her, and I don't think it's on her campaign strategy either. I think she had a really strong campaign, actually, and she made use of a lot of new media to kind of get that point across. She was going on podcasts. She was even making inroads on places like Fox News, a place that is rather famously not exactly, we'll say, charitable towards people on the left, or the truth in general, for that matter. So I really want to emphasize that point. I think Kamala did a fantastic job, and I think that with the time she was given, we can't expect anything more from her. Which brings me to the next point of, I think a lot of people at the moment are looking to play the blame game. And it's hard not to, right? This is not just any old election. This is one of the most important elections that we've had on record. It is difficult not to play the blame game under the circumstances. But at the same time, we can't afford to at the moment. It's all well and good looking at what went wrong, but at the same time, we need to really be banding together. It's actually a point that Joe Biden made really well in the speech he gave, acknowledging Donald Trump's victory. I think that he hit on a number of key points there, and most importantly, that his time in office is not over yet.
I know for some people, it's a time for victory, to state the obvious. For others, it's a time of loss. Now we have 74 days to finish the term, our term. Let's make every day count. Setbacks are unavoidable, but giving up is unforgivable. We all get knocked down. But the measure of our character, as my dad would say, is how quickly we get back up.
There's still time to prepare and get ready for the storm that is approaching. Not to make that sound like a Virgil reference from, like, Devil May Cry 5. That was terrible, I'm not adding that. I know I've just talked about not playing the blame game, but at times like this I can't help but think about the news networks that are inevitably going to benefit from a Trump presidency. And I don't mean Fox News, I mean all of them. Because let's face it, a Democrat presidency is often seen as a safe pair of hands. You're not making news articles on the daily about what's going on. And as much as the economy has been a major talking point in this election, the US economy has been doing really well. Under Joe Biden, there's been falling inflation and low unemployment levels, but we're not talking about that. The thing with the media is that fear sells, and Trump is a fearmonger, both in terms of the rhetoric he puts out and as a figure in office. There is no way of sugarcoating this, though. A Trump presidency is going to hurt. It's going to hurt his supporters, as he is apparently going to be raising tariffs. The tech bros in particular are going to be hurt by this because, well, a lot of the chips that they're importing come from China, and the major tariffs are likely going to raise the prices on tech considerably. But in a more general sense, it's not just about people's jobs or their livelihood, it's also about their fundamental protections. And women in particular are going to be really hard hit by this. With Project 2025 looking like it's now going to be an official proposal, then there's probably going to be an even harsher crackdown on abortion. Competing for jobs is likely going to get tougher, especially for people who aren't white, and means that women and people of colour are less likely to be safe overall. Again, there's no downplaying it, this is going to be a really rough 4 years, okay? There is a real possibility that women end up getting treated in America like they're second-class citizens, and I think it's likely that hate crime is also going to be on the rise, given Donald Trump's jingoistic rhetoric and his promises of mass deportation. His supporters are probably going to try and take those actions into their own hands, most likely linked to stochastic terrorism stemming from far-right sources like the President of the United States. It's also likely going to lead to difficulties on the world stage as well. Here in Britain, it's probably not going to be as bad as it is in other countries, but after Brexit left us isolated from the European Union, America's been a lifeline in some ways, and that relationship is now looking pretty strained, so we're going to have to wait and see on that one. In other countries, though, the threat is looking far more apparent. The fact that Benjamin Netanyahu is praising a Trump presidency should tell you everything you need to know about what this could mean for the Palestinian people. This also means imminent danger for Ukraine. Many of the soldiers on election day, while actively monitoring for Russian troops, were also keeping very close eyes on the election. Some troops even describing that little bit of hope leaving them as Trump was edging closer and closer to the White House. Because it is really important to them. Because a Trump presidency would likely mean concessions to Russia and a complete cut-off of aid to Ukraine. And like I said in my election video, it won't stop there. It won't stop with Ukraine. Concessions is a win for Russia, because it means that they occupy 1/5 of the country that they didn't occupy before. And it is exactly the kind of message that Russia and China will be looking for. A green light that says they can do whatever they want. Now we could go on about this. I could go on about the fact that he's a threat on the world stage, he's a threat to the world as a climate denier, and he's a threat to his own people as he edges closer to becoming an autocrat through Project 2025. But if you're watching this video, there's a very good chance you already know that. So instead of looking at the things that we can't change, let's look at what we can, and also what we need to change if we have a hope in the next election. Because despite this being Donald Trump's second term, I don't believe for a moment that he intends on stepping down after 4 years. In fact, I think the term limit is going to be one of the first things to go under his presidency. And when that does happen, we need to be ready. Okay, so first things first. Despite the fact that the Republicans do in fact have control over all three houses, that doesn't mean that they have full control. Despite their majority in Congress, important legislation still requires a 60% majority to pass. This is an important point because Republicans don't have that 60%, meaning Democrats can stall a lot of their agenda when it comes to destroying democracy. There's also the filibuster. While it isn't exactly being used the way it was intended, at the moment we can use it, so we'll take it. It's another tool for delaying and hopefully stopping some of the legislation from getting through, but that's what the Democrats have got to work with, so hopefully they'll use it to good effect. Another point I want to hit on is actually regarding Republicans, and I know this may be a little odd given we've just seen them have a sweeping victory, but there are some Republicans talking about their party being dead. Liz Cheney is a famous example of someone who's spoken out against Donald Trump multiple times, but recently people like Josh Hawley have also started to come out and are talking about either joining the Democrat Party or maybe forming a party of their own. And maybe that decisive victory for Trump and his populist agenda will force the more traditional Republicans to make that decision. There's also the factor that is Elon Musk. I, like many people, am not a fan of the incessant man-child, but he is an important factor that we need to talk about here. Elon Musk bought a town square for $44 billion and then used it as a major public platform for Donald Trump. He turned Twitter into a cesspool for neo-Nazis, and we're all suffering the consequences of that. I don't know how much of an impact that will have had on the election, but people like Elon Musk and Andrew Tate have clearly managed to get their hooks into the younger generation, specifically men of the younger generation, which is a point I'll talk about in a minute, but something that definitely needs to be addressed. But currently we're talking about Elon, and he's a bit of an eccentric character, right? From Neuralink to making everyone love and then hate electric vehicles with Tesla, he is kind of the elephant in the room when it comes to Donald Trump, and he looks like he's going to have a lot of power in Trump's government. But I think this might end up actually doing more harm than good for him. In Trump's campaign, you've got people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? Who are these people who are entirely devoted to the MAGA crowd. Their ego, their sense of being comes from Donald Trump, ultimately. Their actions are almost an extension of him. So while you've got someone who is incredibly opinionated, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, ultimately they're still subservient to Trump, and so we can control them through loyalty. The problem is, Elon Musk is a bit different. While he's lately been hanging around with the MAGA crowd, and he's definitely done his damnedest to destroy Twitter and make it a right-wing cesspit, I think ultimately it's coming from a place of self-validation. He needs people to like him to the point where he's getting his engineers to artificially boost his tweets. But that ego, I think, will end up being a bit of a problem for Trump. Musk, similarly to Marjorie Taylor Greene, is very opinionated, but I don't know whether he has loyalty to anyone other than himself. I think it's only a matter of time before Trump and Musk have a falling out, and that's probably going to result in Musk throwing all of his toys out of the pram very dramatically. It's also worth noting that Musk is quite an important figure for America in terms of the number of contracts he holds. So if Trump is planning on expanding that, only for Musk to throw a temper tantrum, then I think he's going to sorely regret putting him in that position of power. Okay, so we talked about what the Democrats can do, we talked about some of the volatility within Trump's own ranks, but what can we as average people do? I think for women in particular, looking at some of the tenets of the 4B movement might be applicable here. For a little bit of background, the 4B movement started out in Korea and had 4 different tenets: no dating men, no marriage with men, no sex with men, and no giving birth, essentially acting as a protest against the gender roles in the culture. That being said, I am hesitant to bring up the 4B movement, given it has ties to transphobia. So while I think that some of the tenets could be useful, I don't think the movement itself should be taken forward given its transphobic links. The thing is, for a second Trump presidency, it's not really meant as a protest as much as it is for women's safety, as pregnancy is now potentially a death sentence. It's a tool to help keep women safe, and under the circumstances, I think it's worth looking into. The last thing I want to talk about is men. Now, I've mentioned this before. I mentioned Andrew Tate and Elon Musk kind of getting their hooks into younger men in particular, but it is a problem. Places like TikTok promoting people like Andrew Tate, as well as streamers like Aiden Ross or podcast hosts like Joe Rogan, have led a large group of younger people to the right, and we're now in the sticky situation of trying to de-radicalize them. Men are falling into these traps. Maybe they start out by listening to Andrew Tate on TikTok, and maybe it's because they find him funny, right? He's saying something so outlandish, so ridiculous that no one could possibly think that. He's clearly a caricature. And then they keep watching, because they keep getting recommended stuff by him, and eventually you fall further and further down that pipeline. When addressing and dealing with these people, there's a number of important things that we need to make sure we're doing. Firstly, these are not idiots. They're not stupid people. They may be believing something that is completely untrue, but they didn't get here overnight. Also, their perspective of the left is likely going to be of a bunch of people looking down on them. There has to be other ways of approaching these men, because their votes matter, and currently they're voting for a fascist, and we need to find a way of reaching them. So the next question is, how do we do that? It's the things that end up getting memed on that end up sticking with us. Donald Trump can say that Haitian immigrants are eating cats and dogs, and there is no repercussions to that. The left-wing media goes and does the research, makes sure that these claims are untrue, and then reports back, but by that time, it's already spread like wildfire. It doesn't matter that the statements are blatantly false. It doesn't matter that the only case where someone had given a report ended up retracting their statement because they then found that their cat was alive. None of that matters. It's all about the story. J.D. Vance actually nailed it on the head.
If I have to create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do.
But then that creates a bit of a problem, doesn't it? Because we don't want to abandon the truth. That's exactly what separates us from the far right. That and empathy, a basic conscience, sense of wrongdoing, not being general psychopaths. But the point still stands. It's really unfortunate that in a video where I've spent a good portion of it talking about the effect this is going to have on women, that the people we most need to appeal to are actually young men. But that is the reality. We need to find a way of reaching these people on their platforms. Someone like Jon Stewart is fantastic. They can lambast Trump, sure, but they'll also hold their own side to account. His honesty is so refreshing because he's done the research and knows what he's talking about. I've talked before about the media, but the various articles that would go to disproving a statement, like the one Donald Trump put out about Haitian immigrants, his supporters are never going to read that. When the impeachment trials were going on, Fox News didn't even show it. That says everything you need to know about them. So it's not getting through. You can't reach them through the news because they're not watching it, so you've got to find other ways of getting to them. Whether it be via YouTube, podcasts, or streamers, those are the places that really need a voice for the left at the moment. And I'm not necessarily talking about full-time political streamers like your Hassans or your Destinys. They have a place, sure, but we need something a bit more general, something that has widespread appeal that isn't going to be talking about politics 100% of the time, because people aren't interested, especially when they have less to lose. The last thing I want to talk about today is populism, and this is what won Donald Trump his second term. Like I mentioned before, it doesn't actually matter that the economy is doing pretty well under Biden, because it's never been about that. It's about how people feel and exploiting that. And just on that statement alone, you may be wondering, well, if it's all about exploiting people, how can that be beneficial? How can we use that as a responsible tool? But we do have people who have used left-wing populism to great effect. I want to talk about two here and the different approaches they've taken. Firstly is Senator Bernie Sanders. Now, he may not be what you think of when you think of populist. That's precisely why his approach is so effective. When he's talking about problems, he's not trying to combat whatever the right is saying. What he does do is talk about small businesses being affected by large corporations, going on about how we need to get them to pay their fair share. That's the kind of populism that can really work. You're avoiding a lot of the traps that Republicans would set up for you, but it's also something that encourages people to act. Instead of right-wing populism where you're using fear and hate to control people, with someone like Bernie Sanders, you're using hope to unite them. And if the Democrats want to win, they really need to look at Bernie Sanders' style of politics going forward. The other person I want to talk about is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I think another good example of left-wing populism, but in a different direction to Bernie Sanders. Definitely more willing to engage in trans rights and LGBT protections, but it also means that she becomes a target for the media. I think that AOC is genuinely a phenomenal politician, but I think that out of the two styles of populism, we need to veer more towards Bernie's approach. AOC is essentially fighting on the defending side of a lot of the already existing right-wing talking points, going to bat for people who are helpless. And while that is incredibly important work, I think because it's essentially pushing back on a lot of existing right-wing talking points, can distract from a number of important topics by focusing in on the things that the far right are taking aim at and leaving the areas that they're potentially weak on. Essentially getting you to debate on their turf, which is never a position you want to be in. There's that expression about avoiding a debate with an idiot, where they will drag you down to their level and beat you over the head with experience. And it's the same with far-right populism if you choose to engage with it. They're not campaigning on the truth, so even if you know more than they do, it will often fall on deaf ears, in favour of hateful rhetoric. It just ends up being a lose-lose situation. On a campaign trail, it would be far easier to use that approach against someone than Sanders' more focused approach towards large corporations. But again, both are vitally important. That being said, while it would be good to get a couple more figureheads within the Democrat Party, this kind of approach doesn't need to be limited to elected Democrats. I've already mentioned streamers and podcast people and YouTubers, but if you're not interested in doing any of that, and I can't blame you, then it's about the conversations we have with our families. Right now it may feel like rock bottom, but we are far from done. There's probably going to be a lot that's going to happen over the next 4 years. And while I've tried to cover what some of our options are, it is going to hurt. But we will make it through it, and we will be ready when election time rolls around in 2028. But hey, thank you guys for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. It is not my typical video, but there we go. I know it's a bit different from the stuff I usually make, but I hope it's been okay. If you liked it, please leave a like and maybe a nice comment. Maybe share it with your friends. I'll have a number of sources linked down below if you're interested. But one in particular I'd like to mention is the video Zaid Talks has put out about the election and what people can do. Whereas I'm kind of just rambling here, Zaid does a really good job of analysing and breaking this stuff down, and I highly recommend it. So there's a link if you're interested and want to find out more. Also, to anyone who's interested, I do stream games on a second channel that's linked down below. I usually go live on weekends at 6 PM GMT, so if that sounds interesting, feel free to join. But hey, I've been Banquo. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in a bit.